curtain had closed. When it had become obvious that the curtain might never reopen and that there was no hope of rescue, the colonists had gathered their philosophers, religious authorities, sociologists, and anthropologists together. The group had hammered out the rules and conventions of a society they believed would be able to survive the rigors of isolation in an untamed wilderness. The cornerstone of their carefully crafted civilization was marriage. Sooner or later, almost everyone got married. Although happiness was not the most important goal in marriage, the founders had understood that well-matched couples would add to the stability of the institution. To that end, they had established matchmaking agencies staffed with synergistic psychologists to ensure unions that could stand the test of time. The concept had proven so successful that today non-agency marriages were extremely rare. It was true that a few alliances among the elite were contracted for old-fashioned reasons, such as money and power, but the vast majority of the population had the good sense to go through the agencies. Families insisted upon it. Hobart stared at Nick, perplexed. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Chastain, but if you want a wife, why don't you just walk through the front door of Synergistic Connections and register the same as anyone else?" Nick leaned back in his chair and popped one elbow on the cushioned arm. He rested his chin on the heel of his hand and allowed the silence in the red-and-gilt chamber to deepen while he considered the situation. Hobart was proving to be more difficult than he had anticipated. The jovial, well-dressed little man who had entered the casino 3 hours ago looked crushed and crumpled now, but Hobart was still able to reason clearly enough to be wary of the bargain Nick had offered. Hobart was scared, but he was not stupid. It was time to take a closer look at the matrix. Nick drew a breath and released part of it, as though he were preparing to throw a knife or pull a trigger. He had no prism to help him focus his psychic energy, but after years of grim determination, he had achieved enough control to use his raw paranormal abilities in a crude manner for a few seconds at a time. He was a matrix talent, gifted or cursed, depending on one's point of view, with a rare form of psychic energy that gave him the ability to intuitively perform what was technically known as synergistic matrix analysis. In lay terms, it meant that he could see connections, weigh possibilities, estimate odds, and deduce synergistic relationships where others saw only random events or complete chaos. Matrix talents were uncommon, and most were not especially strong. They tended to rank below Class 5 on the paranormal scale that had been developed by the experts. Very powerful matrix talents, such as Nick, were virtually unknown, the stuff of psychic vampire legends. Research on matrix talents was limited, not only because the number of people who manifested the unusual form of paranormal energy was so small, but also because most of them refused to be studied. Matrix talents were a suspicious lot. Some people claimed they were downright paranoid. The development of a wide variety of psychic powers in the descendants of the colonists had first been observed some 50 years after the closing of the curtain. As with everything else on St. Helens, the phenomena was governed by synergistic principles. To work the talent effectively, efficiently, and with a degree of reliability, people who possessed paranormal abilities required the assistance of individuals known as prisms. Prisms were unique in that their paranormal gifts were limited to the ability to project a psychic crystal. The prism crystal constructs they created on the metaphysical plane were used by those who possessed psychic talent to focus and control their talent. The combined use of both kinds of psychic power, talent and prism, required willing cooperation from both of the people involved. The necessity of mutual agreement between prism and talent was thought to be nature's way of ensuring that talents didn't become predatory. Just another example of the laws of synergism in practice. The need for prism in order to use his power to the fullest extent annoyed Nick, as it did most strong talents. But the laws of synergy prevailed. You couldn't fight Mother Nature. Writers of popular fiction and successful filmmakers routinely thrilled audiences with tales of so-called psychic vampires, off-the-chart talents, who could overpower innocent prisms and harness their focusing abilities for dark ends. But scientists scoffed at the notion that any talent, no matter how strong, could be used for more than the briefest of moments without the willing assistance of a prism. Even if, hypothetically speaking, it were possible for a prism to be overpowered, they said, the prism could simply switch off. Low-level prisms who attempted to focus a much higher power talent were subject to an unpleasant but temporary form of burnout. The laws of supply and demand being what they were,